Hey guys, I'm Naya and welcome back to the channel. For today's video, we're going to be talking about the top 5 rulings you need to know when it comes to post-Darkwing Blast and the post-Mama format. We are entering quite a scary format, and I do think a couple things are very important to talk about. Now, mostly we are going to be covering the Tearlament deck. All of the rulings can be applied to cards that are worded in the same way, and you will soon know exactly what I'm talking about. So it can be applied to multiple different things, but we are going to be focusing on the Tearlament deck because the Tearlament Ishizu deck is going to be pretty much dominating for a couple months now, and all of us just need to be prepared. So before we get started, I just want to quickly shout out all of my Patreons. I'm so thankful for you guys' support. And I've also mentioned on Patreon, I am going to be changing things up when it comes to Patreon, when it comes to tiers, when it comes to the perks you get. So keep an eye out for that. I will make sure to notify you guys on the community tab as well when all of the changes go into effect when it comes to my Patreon. So if you're interested, just make sure to keep an eye out on the community tab. So yeah, the first ruling we're going to be covering is going to be about Tearlaments Rulkallos. So Rulkallos is the new fusion monster from Darkwing Blast, and basically where the confusion, sort of, you could say, comes from is people like to send with Rulkallos' effect regardless. And what I'm talking about is when you have Rulkallos' effect, which says that, and I do want to read it because the wording is very, very important. Basically, the thing we're going to be looking at is you can negate the activation, and if you do destroy it, then send one Tearlaments card from your hand or face-up field to the graveyard. So where the issue is, people like to send the card regardless if they destroy what they're negating or not. And when the card you're negating is in the graveyard, it's not going to be destroyed. So if Rulkallos is negating something that's activating in the graveyard, because it didn't destroy it, you don't send the card. And in my opinion, people will try to cheat with that. It's not just me warning you of not making mistakes, it's also me warning you of cheaters because people cheat. It's just what it is, and you need to be aware of it. If you don't destroy, you don't send. And if you're the Tearlament player, you naturally want a plus off of sending. So there's that, just don't send if you didn't destroy because it would be cheating. And we're also going to be looking at the second part of Rulkallos' effect, where it says if this fusion summon card is sent to the graveyard by card effect, you can basically revive it, and it needs to be fusion summoned. And the issue is because Kaleido Heart doesn't say it, so people just got used to Kaleido Heart's effect. When it's sent to the graveyard, you're able to foolish the Tearlaments card, you're able to revive it and all of that. And it doesn't really matter how many times the Kaleido Heart leaves the field, you will reborn it again, because it doesn't say if this fusion summon card is destroyed by card effect, but the Rulkallos does say it. So again, sometimes people will cheat, sometimes they will just make an honest mistake, but if it wasn't fusion summoned, because when it's brought back from the graveyard the first time, so first fusion summoned, it's brought back, it's not a fusion summoned monster anymore. So maybe I should have said that at the very beginning, but when it's brought back, it's not fusion summoned anymore, so you can't just get rid of it, bring it back. It doesn't work like Kaleido Heart, so that's really, really important to note. So the next one I actually took off of Judges Lounge. I like to shout Judges Lounge out in every single one of my videos. Basically, when it comes to rulings, it is just an amazing, amazing resource for rulings, and people try so hard to answer the questions, and it's just a really nice place to turn to when you're unsure of specific rulings. And someone asked this question, and I figured it would be interesting to cover it. So how does the interaction between Necrovalley and the Bystial Lubellion work? And what I'm talking about is whether or not Bystial Lubellion can actually special summon itself from the graveyard or not, because Necrovalley, as we all know, is supposed to like just prevent cards from going from the graveyard, but it's a bit more specific than that. Basically, Necrovalley says that it negates any card effect that would move a card in the graveyard to a different place. But when you look at the Bystial Lubellion, usually when cards will say something along the lines of cannot be normal summon set, or can only be special summoned by, must be special summoned, must first be special summoned, all of those are just summoning conditions. And as it's not a card effect, Necrovalley actually doesn't prevent Lubellion from special summoning itself from the graveyard, which is really nice if you're the Bystial player. So that's something very, very important to keep in mind, because Necrovalley is popping off in the meta right now naturally because of Tearlament. So it's just so nice to know this and know that someone cannot prevent your Bystial Lubellion from coming out of the graveyard with Necrovalley. So the next one has to do with Ishizu cards. So we got to the post-mama stuff at last. So when it comes to Keldo and Mudora, both of them can banish themselves from the graveyard in order to target up to 3 cards or up to 5 cards and shuffle them into the deck. So I purposely stressed them because what we're going to be talking about is just the difference between shuffling them into the deck and shuffling those targets or something along those lines into the deck. Basically, when it comes to a card effect that says them, if one of the targets just is not there anymore due to whatever reason, you are still going to be shuffling as much as possible. Whereas if a card effect would say shuffle those targets into the deck, it needs to be those specific targets. And if we just look a couple months back into one of the formats that I naturally really liked because I played Prank Kids, if you look at Prank Kids Pranks, it basically says during the end phase you can target 3, except blah blah, shuffle all 3 into the deck, then draw 1 card. So this card is very specific as to you need to shuffle all 3 to be able to draw 1 card. But when you look at Keldo, when you look at Mudora, it just says them. So even if you get rid of one of the targets, you still shuffle as many as possible back. So we mentioned Keldo, we mentioned Mudora, but now we're going to be moving to Kelbek and Agido. Basically, what we're going to be talking about when it comes to them is whether or not they are trigger effects or quick effects, specifically in the TCG. Because in the OCG, they are considered as quick effects since they trigger in an area of private knowledge. It's just sort of how their rulings work, which is not really important right now because we are talking about the TCG. And over here, they are considered as trigger effects. And why we're even mentioning that is because you need to think about where on the chain those cards are going to be placed. We are moving to a format of literally a billion chain links, and you need to be so mindful of who's the turn player, who needs to put their effects on the chain first, which card can chain to what, depending on who the turn player is, and just depending on so many different factors. So when it comes to Kelbek, when it comes to Agido, since they're trigger effects, the turn player needs to put them on the chain first. And if I'm the turn player and I milled a Kelbek, you're my opponent, you milled an Agido, my Kelbek will still go on the chain as it's a trigger effect first, and then yours will go on the chain. And if I happened to have milled some other things I want to activate, for example, let's say a Murdley, a Scream, a Kelbek, you milled a Hofines and an Agido, my trigger effects need to go on the chain first, so all 3 can be put on the chain, and then it's your turn and you place all of your trigger effects. Whereas if they were quick effects, they would need to go on the chain last. So when it comes to how chains are built, basically you would go by turn player mandatory, opponent mandatory, turn player trigger, opponent trigger, and then it's quick effects of the turn player, quick effects of the opponent. So it's just really important to note, basically they are trigger effects. You need to declare them in the same chain. So if you maybe forget, if you think they're quick effects, you don't declare them, then it's your opponent's turn to place all of their trigger effects. You can't go, oh, you know, I wish to place my Kelbek on the chain as well. You kind of can't, because you didn't when it came to your trigger effects. So that's important to note. And for the last ruling, we're just going to be covering 2 cards. I figured because both of them are kind of simple and both of them are actually spell cards from Darkwing Blast, we're just going to be quickly covering Tearlaments Scream and Tearlaments Grief. So when it comes to Tearlaments Scream, so basically Scream says that if a monster is normal or special summoned, or multiple monsters, and you control a Tearlaments monster or Visa Starfrost except during the damage step, you're able to mill the top 3 cards of your deck, and then it has the second part of the effect. But basically what the question is, and again it was posted on Judge's Lounge, basically if you don't control a single Tearlaments monster, but you do normal summon one of them or special summon one of them, can Scream be activated? And the answer is yes, because before Scream activates, it checks whether or not you control a Tearlaments monster. And since you did summon and immediately you activate Scream, Scream still was able to check that the Tearlaments monster is physically on the board. So it's perfectly legal to go, for example, summon Murdley, chainlink 1 Murdley effect, chainlink to Scream effect, and you mill 6 cards, because the Murdley is, at the time of Scream's activation of its effect, it is on the field, so you are able to mill. So that's just a very quick explanation of Tearlaments Scream, and we're also going to be covering Tearlaments Grief, like I said. And the question was whether or not you're able to activate Tearlaments Grief on an empty field. Now, if you checked out my Tearlaments Everything Tearlaments video featuring GGYGO a couple videos back, we mentioned this interaction because when the card was first announced, all of us were like, does it work that way? Because if it does, it's essentially a foolish burial because you're able to summon the monster and then you need to send one to the graveyard. But if you don't control any at activation, can you even activate it? Can you even summon a monster from the deck and immediately just send that monster to the grave? But the answer is that yes, it is just a different version of a foolish burial. You are able to special summon a Tearlaments monster from the deck and you're able to send it, the same one, away. And in tandem with that, I also want to address when it comes to something that activates on summon, for example, Rhino or Burley. If you special summon either one of them and you decide to send that specific copy to the graveyard, you cannot trigger its on summon effect, but that has to do with the 2020 Master Rule revisions. Basically, a monster cannot activate its effect if it left the trigger location before it's able to activate. So if you go, okay, special summon Merly, send the Merly away, then you activate the Merly in the graveyard, you cannot activate the Mill 3 effect. But when it comes to Rhinoheart, if you special summon it from the deck, again, you cannot activate its on summon effect if you decided to send the Rhinoheart away. However, if in the next chain you go Rhinoheart effect, revive it, pitch a Tearlaments card, of course you're able to activate it on summon because it was summoned off of its effect and it's still on the field, like physically present. So there's the difference. There's the explanation. I figured I would cover both of them in the last ruling to cover as much information as possible because both of them are kind of basic and just simple, and it's just important to know because we are going to be using those cards a lot moving forward. So those will be the 5 rulings. Like I always say, I'm becoming so repetitive, but I love doing ruling videos. So if you guys enjoy them, please let me know. I would love to make even more on this format, on different decks in this format, on everything post-Mama, because we are going into a wild format. So let me know what you think. Let me know if there's anything more specific that you would want me to cover when it comes to the topic of rulings. And just if you like the video, of course, like it, sub to the channel, check out all of the social media, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.